G'day fellow CarNut. Welcome to the Subaru XV e-Boxer Hybrid. And what kind of thing is that, you ask? It's essentially a Subaru XV with the addition of an electric motor and a battery pack. So let's break that down into the specifics. Up front you get a 2-litre horizontally opposed boxer engine, petrol engine, like you do in every other Subaru XV. And that puts out 110 kilowatts of power and 194 newton meters. Plus we have a 12.3 kilowatt electric motor that produces 66 newton meters of torque. It's a mild hybrid, so all of its charging up is done through the vehicle's passage down the road. There's no plugs or little doors on the side of the vehicle to plug it into the wall charger at home or plug it into a power charger at a supermarket or anything like that. You charge up the battery by driving down the road like we're doing now. Well, really, when you take your foot off the throttle and you're coasting, because it uses regenerative braking to recharge the battery. Hybrids make a lot of sense because, yes, you've got an internal combustion engine when you want to go see Grandma down in Hastings and you need to nail 400 or 500 kilometres at a stretch. And you've got an electric vehicle for when you're just shuffling around town in stop-start, nose-to-tail traffic. So how's the XV hybrid to drive? You know, like in the real world, not as if I'm in a fuel economy run and I'm trying to eke out every last piece of fuel or use the electric motor as much as possible. I'm talking about real world driving like we expect our Subarus to do all day, every day. Well, it's actually pretty bloody good. I've got to say, this electric motor with its extra 66 newton meters of torque is a very useful addition to the XV's powertrain. The thing is that the XV, like pretty much every Subaru these days, is anchored to a CVT transmission. And CVTs, we know, are not the greatest at providing reassuring acceleration compared to the engine note. So you hit the throttle pedal, the revs climb, but your speed doesn't really climb to match. What the electric motor is doing is it actually adds its torque to the drivetrain and takes a lot of the load off the transmission. It really does. It's a 66 newton meters, so that's what? Basically another third of twisting power that the petrol engine produces. And that extra third is really, really handy. Not that you have to be driving fast or hard to enjoy it. It just means that the transmission just goes about its business so much more, you know, innocuously. You just don't notice that it's a CVT anymore. And that's a big plus, because without it, you know, CVTs, don't get me started. Now don't get me wrong, the XV is certainly no rocket ship. If you're looking at doing 0 to 100k acceleration tests, well, you better bring an egg timer because she's not that brisk. And yes, it still rev flares. Even in ordinary driving, you're still aware, or I'm certainly still aware, that it's a CVT. But the electric motor is definitely a help, and I think it's a worthwhile improvement over what the petrol-only CVT transmissioned XV is capable of. It's far quieter, the acceleration is much more predictable and more trustworthy. The rev flaring that you usually get in the petrol engine only version is nowhere near as prevalent. So that makes the e-Boxer hybrid version, I think, the pick of the bunch in terms of a drive. It's very capable on twisty, windy little roads like we're on now. They're gravel, but look, whether they're tar sealed or gravel or snow or sand or a real muddy forestry track, it doesn't make too much difference to the capabilities of this car. It's just so much fun to toss around. It also has quite long travel suspension, which would normally mean that you're going to have a roly-poly existence in corners, but you're not in this because, again, that low centre of gravity keeps everything nice and flat and stable, and it makes the interior of the car just a really restful place to be and somewhere you can have a lot of fun in. Because I'm going reasonably quickly on this this muddy road, and the car is just feeling so supremely comfortable. It's really, really impressive. Not only is it capable of staying flat and secure in these corners, but it's actually entertaining. It's actually really responsive to my changes in input through the steering wheel, and it just feels a lot of fun. Now, carrying the batteries around in the boot does of course have a weight penalty. The e-Boxer hybrid version is about 100 kgs heavier than the similarly spec'd petrol engine only XV. So you're carrying around kind of like a very big boned friend with you all the time, that extra 100 kgs. But it is in the boot, underneath the boot floor actually, and it is quite low. So it doesn't really affect the balance of the car, I've found. I think the XV handles particularly well. The boot in this vehicle, even though it's got the battery sitting underneath it, has a slightly larger capacity than the petrol engine version does, because in the petrol engine version you get a spare wheel. In here you just get a bottle of goop to put inside your punctured wheel and try and get home with that. So that's a bit of a drawback, because I think if you've got a puncture in a Subaru, chances are you might be out in the bush or up the mountain or somewhere quite a long way from a proper puncture repair place, and these bottles of goop are only allowed to, or only supposed to take you for a short distance at a relatively low speed. So that might be a bit of a trade-off that you have to consider when you're buying an XV e-Boxer hybrid. Make sure you don't get a puncture too far away from a service station. So why would you buy the e-Boxer hybrid version of the XV? Well, maybe you've had a woke moment and you've decided that you want to contribute less to greenhouse gas emissions. This car is going to do a little bit of that, a really little bit of that. Maybe if you live in town or you live in a place where you've got lots of real slow speed, nose to tail, crawling along motorways, you know, day in, day out, then you're going to enjoy quite good fuel savings. And I've seen fuel savings around, you know, from anywhere from 10 to 15, maybe 20% published. But that's only when the electric motor is going to allow you to sail along the road, as they say, sail it along, which it'll do up to about sort of 40, maybe 50 kilometers an hour. If you've got really light load on the vehicle, it's going along the flat, and it's about, you know, under 50 kilometers an hour, the electric motor can run the vehicle. But it can only do that for a few kilometers. It's not something that you can drive it around thinking you're driving an electric vehicle. It's an electrified vehicle. So if you just breathe on the throttle pedal, or there's a slight headwind or a little incline you've got to go up, then the petrol engine will start. The car will give it a little bit of a shudder. Unfortunately, the petrol engine turning on is a little bit intrusive, but anyway, then you'll be under petrol and electric motor. And then if you've got low battery state or other conditions that the machine decides for you it's better not to use the electric motor, then you'll be under pure petrol motor propulsion. So there's a number of different modes that the car will do. Of course, it'll go into charging those batteries if you decelerate, and it uses engine braking to put power back into the battery pack and keep it topped up. There is no driver control for what mode your vehicle is operating in. The machine does its decisions by itself, and all you can choose to do is point it where you want it to go. Now, there is a rather unfortunate side effect with the XV, and I'm going to show you what it is. In fact, I'm going to let you listen to what it is. It's slow speeds when it's in EV mode. You hear this sort of grinding noise. It's like a stone caught, you know, behind a brake rotor up against a backing plate. I'm just going to drive past our outside camera. and hopefully that's picking it up. It's kind of a, it's a worrying sound because it sounds like metal on metal, and I'm sure it's meant to be there. Maybe it's a safety sound so that people know that there's an electric vehicle coming at them otherwise very quietly. But it's just the wrong sort of sound for them to make. I don't know why they've made this sort of, can you hear that? Let's try and button off so that we, it's really quite pronounced. But that noise is what the XV makes in slow speed maneuvers, and I think it's a real turn-off. What else? Nothing much else actually. It's a funky look, it's a funky exterior, it's a funky interior. The car drives well. It's just such a delight to drive on New Zealand roads. These Subarus seem to be calibrated specifically for New Zealand. I don't think I come across another vehicle manufacturer where every car in their range seems to drive so well on Kiwi roads. So that's a good thing. Now, in New Zealand, the XV range starts with Sport at $37,500. This one, the hybrid, is $42,500, so $42,490. So it's an extra $5,000 up from the Sport. And $42,490, funnily enough, is the same price as the premium, the petrol engine premium version of the XV, which comes with sunroof and leather and climate air and all that sort of governs. So you're paying sort of $5,000 for essentially a sport trim level, but with the batteries and the motor. Well, it's not really an apples with apple comparison with the Sport, because the hybrid does have a few other nice bits of tech on board as well that the Sport doesn't have. For instance, it has vision assist with its eyesight technology, which gives you a lane keep assist, lane departure warning, autonomous emergency braking, adaptive cruise control, which you don't get in the Sport. It also has rear cross traffic alert through what is now a very excellent rear vision camera. And I notice also, I think this is the first Subaru that I've driven that has parking sensors on the rear. Great, love that. Now, there's no denying $5,000 is a lot of extra money to pay for the hybrid XV. I guess it comes down to a question of priorities, isn't it? Would you rather have $5,000 in your back pocket, or creature comforts like a sunroof, climate air, leather upholstery, and all the snob appeal that the premium badge on the boot might give you with an XV Premium? Or, for the same amount of money, would you rather have this, the hybrid, be seen to be doing your bit for the environment, enjoying maybe some marginal fuel savings, but definitely enjoying a nicer driving experience? Well, for me, it's probably the latter. I would probably plump for the hybrid in the XV range, because to my mind, it's a better drive, and the fuel savings, they'll be nice if they ever eventuate, but I'm not banking on it. Look, I've been driving this particular one for, 350 kilometers. And the little machine here tells me that in that time, I've been in EV mode for 3 hours, 12 minutes. And in those 350 kilometers, I've saved 2.011 litres. So 2 litres over 350k. So what's that, about $3.90, maybe $4 in petrol? So it's going to take a long time to recover that $5,000, isn't it, for the extra price of this over above the Sport option of the XV. But you know, it's not all about that, is it? We've all got to be doing the right bit where we can for the environment, and yeah, any savings are better than none. And as I say, I still think that this is a better drive, because the 66 Newton meters that the electric motor adds to the powertrain just helps that CVT be a little less flustered all the time. And to my mind, that's probably the best reason I'd go for the XV e-Boxer hybrid.